And joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Maria Cardona, CNN political commentator and Democratic strategist. We also have Jason Osborne, former Republican strategist and ex-campaign advisor to Donald Trump. He joins me from Baton Rouge in Louisiana. Thanks to you both for staying up late for us. Jason, let's start with you. So McCarthy got more Democratic votes than he got from his own party. I mean, he relied on the enemy. Even some of his own colleagues are saying that. Where did the events of the last week or so leave McCarthy in terms of his job security?
Well, I think we're slowly reaching a point where if I'm McCarthy and other members of his leadership team, I'm going to call Matt Gaetz's bluff on this, because we can't continue to go down this road where every single time there's a vote or an issue that's coming up, McCarthy has to worry about whether he's going to have a revolt against him within his own party. I think, though, that, as we're moving forward here, McCarthy does have 45 days to try and accomplish what he has set out to do, which is to pass 13 appropriations bills out of the House and hopefully have the Senate step in and pass them as well, so that we can get that portion of the agenda taken care of. But I do think that Kevin McCarthy certainly is breathing a sigh of relief today. It's not the way that he wanted it to happen, but it happened, and I think he's turning to the next page to go on to the next battle.
Yeah. Maria, as a Democratic strategist, how should Democrats handle what's happening in a political sense? Heaven forbid bipartisanship became the preferred way of doing things in Congress. What do you think?
Well, I think clearly Democrats did exactly what they had said that they would do for weeks, which is work with a sensible Speaker McCarthy if he was going to bring to the floor a clean CR, which he finally did, and Democrats decided that that was the right thing to do. And of course they were going to vote for this to keep the government open. But they also stressed that this was all wasted energy, wasted time, chaos that was not needed, stress on the American economy that was not needed, embarrassment on the global stage that was not needed. If only McCarthy had realized from the get-go that he needs to govern by putting country over party, by putting the American people before his own job ambition. And so I think Democrats said, finally, Speaker McCarthy is doing the right thing. He came to his senses and asked for help from Democrats to pass what we all knew in the end had to be a bipartisan bill to keep the government open. But he could have avoided this way before if he had not broken his promise that he made with the White House and with other Democrats back in May to be able to, again, keep the government open, focused on what they had agreed to months ago.
And when it comes to the system, the public reaction to the whole political dysfunction is clear. I just wanted to pull up some research from Pew, and we're just a little more than a year from the presidential election. Nearly 2/3 of Americans, you see it there, 65% say they always or often feel exhausted thinking about politics. 55% feel angry. And there's another one too that says 8 in 10 Americans, 86% in fact, say that the following is a good description of politics, and I'll quote: Republicans and Democrats are more focused on fighting each other than solving problems. Jason, another shutdown. There was a near debt default not long ago. What needs to change to have effective governance rather than the non-stop ideological battles and dysfunction that the public clearly hates?
Well, listen, I've been doing this now for 30 years. I know in the beginning you said former Republican strategist. I don't know if I've retired yet. But, since the 90s, at least, and that's what I can speak to, is the 90s through now, the congressional approval and political approval or politicians' approval is always very low, right? And I don't know that we're going to reach a point where things will change too much, except when we can get rid of some of the folks like Matt Gaetz on our side. And there's a few on the Democrat side that I think are stirring the pot and making things difficult for people to actually get the job done in many ways. I remember back when we had a moderate Republican and we had a conservative Democrat, and those folks tended to band together and respect, each other and try and get things accomplished. But I'm afraid that we're at least a year away from shutting the door on some of these more outspoken folks on both sides, quite frankly. But I wish I had a magic wand to be able to answer that question and come up with solutions, but I'm afraid I don't.
Yeah, Maria, Senator John Fetterman, I mean, it was interesting. He made the comment, I'll just quote him here. He said, pushing the snooze button solves nothing because these same losers will try to pull the same you-know-what in 45 days. And it really does make the point that we were just talking about, that this keeps happening. I mean, looming shutdown is now a routine phrase for journalists these days. And you know, we're going to an international audience. This stuff doesn't happen in other major countries with the regularity that it does here.
That's exactly right, Michael, and that's why I stressed in my first comments that this is a global embarrassment, because this is not what should be happening in the greatest country in the world, in the greatest democracy in the world. But the fact of the matter is that our political system has been poisoned by Republican MAGA, what we call MAGA, Make America Great Again, Trump-inspired extremists who are the ones that were holding Kevin McCarthy hostage in the House of Representatives. And I agree with Jason that this is not going to go away until those MAGA extremists are gone. And I know he likes to include Democrats in here, but let's be very clear. That is a false equivalency. There is no one on the Democratic side that has ever done anything that the MAGA extremists in the House of Representatives just tried to pull with Kevin McCarthy. And we have never had a Speaker of the House that has kowtowed to the extremists the way that Kevin McCarthy did. Lord knows Nancy Pelosi never had that problem. And so the extremists on the Republican side have to go. I hope Kevin McCarthy is able to continue to put them to the side and make sure that they know that what they need to do as a party is to put the country over party and govern. That is their job. They're going to be in political peril if they don't realize that.
A right of reply there, Jason. I'll let you have your say. But how has McCarthy's deal with the devil, if you like, the so-called MAGA Republicans, to get the job of Speaker in the beginning impacted him, and for that matter, how the House is run? What are the risks that that relatively small group of Republicans holding such power in the caucus?
Well, you know, I think to Maria's point, I mean, I think she is accurate in the sense that on the Democrat side, they've never had to deal with this kind of issue because they've never had a majority that has been this small. And our majority is actually from the Republican side getting even smaller, given, you know, some folks that are retired and you know, maybe somebody will be in jail soon, who knows. But I think the problem that we have is that Kevin McCarthy had to make some sort of deal. And I think at its base that Kevin truly felt, as with many others in the Republican Party, is that some of these folks that he was making a deal with would understand that in order to govern and in order to pass legislation, you have to make concessions here and there. You can fight until the bitter end, but at a certain point, you need to understand that the door is going to close and it has to close, and that you can't keep fighting the battle. And that's the problem Kevin had the last few weeks, is that the ball kept getting moved, or the line kept getting moved for Kevin to have to deal with. And so finally he gave up and said, you know what, we're going to make this bipartisan. I'm going to reach out to the Democrats, and it's going to happen again. So I don't know, at the end of the day, I don't know, the caucus has to help Kevin kind of corral these renegades and get them out of the way.
Well, yeah, as I said about the outset, heaven forbid they did all work together. Wouldn't that be nice? We're almost out of time, but Maria, I do want to raise Ukraine. When it comes to that, the historian Timothy Snyder, a super intelligent guy, he tweeted earlier, and I just want to read it. He says, cutting off Ukraine aid makes America unreliable, weakens the cause of democracy, threatens the international legal order, encourages tyrants around the world, and hastens Chinese aggression. Ukraine funding is not in this deal, as we know, despite the majority of House and Senate Republicans wanting continued support for Ukraine. What message is, and it may well come, this aid, but it's not here, and it really does stand out that it's not. What message does that send to Vladimir Putin when a tiny minority threatens that support?
That the Republican Party is giving him a gift. And I think Republicans really need to be careful about that. And I completely agree with the historian. It's a really bad message to send. But I will say President Biden, the Democrats, and I believe the Republicans in Congress that support funding Ukraine, and let's remember that Speaker McCarthy is one of them, they need to work in the next 45 days to ensure that support and funding for Ukraine is as robust as it can be, because we are all in the fight of our time for democracy, not just here in the United States, but all around the world. And if we let Ukraine falter, then to the historian's point, that is a huge gift to Putin and to other autocrats around the world, because we're telling them you can do whatever you want and the United States is not going to do a thing. And that is not something that President Biden is going to allow.
We were out of time before I even asked that question. But Jason, I've got to give you a chance to mention Ukraine.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't disagree. I think my concern, I guess, as somebody who is mindful of the U.S. dollar, right, is how much is too much. I think that we have to be in there and supporting Ukraine. I stand by Kevin McCarthy and many others in the Republican Party that do support funding Ukraine. But at a certain level, we need to figure out, like, how much more are we going to do without other countries stepping up and matching us, or at least helping us along the way?
Well, yeah.
I don't think now is the time to have that discussion, but, at some point we need to.
Well, okay, yeah, other countries are spending more than the US, but
That's right.
Jason,
Exactly.
Jason and Maria, really appreciate the time. Do have to leave it there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.